So last time we got the fretwork done on the neck and we got it all polished up and ready to go, and it's as far along as we can get it for the time being, which means that everything is ready for assembly. So I'm going to put this to one side again and start with the body, because there's a little bit more work to do on this than there is on the neck. Now, since the episode where we polished this up, I've actually gone back to this and I've painted the pickup cavity and this little recess here for the truss rod adjuster with some shielding paint, just to give it a dark look so it's not kind of bare wood in there, which means we're now ready to go with the assembly. Now I'm going to start on the back because there's one little job that I need to do on the back, which is now more of a job than it was when I initially did it. Because now we've got the finish on here, these little ferrules that used to go in the little holes no longer do. They're a little bit too big because the finish has reduced the size of that hole ever so slightly. Now I don't want to force these in if I can possibly help it, because that risks damaging the finish, and these were cut with a Forstner bit, which means realistically I can't go back in with that bit just to open them back out again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break out my soldering iron and I'm going to heat these up and see if that will allow us to just push them in. I think that should work. I'm actually really happy with the way this back's come out. It's a nice kind of smooth satin finish that really shows off that grain filling that we did, which is nice. Right, so I've got this as hot as I can possibly get it. It's probably going to take a few seconds to heat up enough to start melting that lacquer a little bit. Just see if I can. There we go. And that's just pushed in really nicely with a block of wood. So I'll repeat that with the others. I've been aware that I'm going to have done this for a little while, and I'll be honest, it's been worrying me because there is some potential for ruining stuff here, but I seem to have got away with it. Just on to the last one. There we go. I just hope I never have to take them out again, because they're going to be pretty well stuck in there. But that is a job that could have been a little bit tricky out of the way, and happily we haven't caused any problems. So next we can actually start to get the hardware installed onto this, and as is my habit, I'm going to start with the strap buttons. And as always, just get a little bit of wax on there first. Now these have all been fitted already, but I'm not taking any chances at this stage. And I always start with the strap buttons because it gives you something convenient to rest the guitar body on if you need to. And next up, put the bridge on, not forgetting to insert the ground wire for that. And again, a bit of wax onto the threads. Now I've filled those holes in the body with wax as well, so they should be fine, but bridge screws, especially if you snap them, are awkward because you've got to kind of relocate the bridge if you can't get that snap screw out. So always kind of double, triple, quadruple careful with them. And then just to make sure, just expose a bit of that wire. Just set that onto 200 ohms setting. And we're just looking for a little bit of resistance there, which we've got. So that means we've got a good ground onto the bridge, which is excellent. I think with that done, we can get the pickup in there. Get those foam springs stuck in place. And I'm just going to loosely screw that in place for the time being. I'm not going to worry too much about adjustment yet. So that's kind of giving me a much better idea about what this thing is actually going to look like when it's together. And so far I am really, really liking it. I think it looks brilliant. So next up is we need to start pulling these controls in. And to do that, we're going to need as much kind of working space in there as possible. So I'm just going to temporarily kind of tape these two wires out of the way. And you've already seen me do this a couple of times, but I've got some of this kind of silicone rubber hose that I'm going to use. So I'll pull that through first. Just kind of get it out of the way. And then I've got some quite strong waxed thread. I'm going to feed in through the output socket, and that is for my, and I'll attach that to the output jack and pull that through with that. And with that done, we can, so we'll just get that bit of string for a start, tie that through there. Just stick the tubing onto the appropriate parts. This tubing is quite small, so it doesn't actually go over the whole of the pot shaft, but it will go over one half of it, which does the job. And then with a little bit of finagling, we can start pulling this all in. It is made slightly more difficult by having the kind of additional wires and stuff in the body, but we'll just have to kind of work around that, I think. That's one. And that's the second one. So now what we need to do is to kind of clip these wires down a little bit and get them all joined up appropriately, and try our best to hide them all inside the body so they're not visible through the F-hole. Now I've marked that one, that's the bridge ground. This one goes to the volume. And this is just my general ground wire. So I'll break out the circuit diagram and the soldering iron and we can start to get this all sorted out. And basically what I need to do is I need the red and black from the pickup. Needs to be attached to this white wire which is going to the volume pot. And then everything else pretty much, so the bridge ground and the white and green and the ground from the pickup all need to be attached to this ground wire here. So not as complicated as you might imagine, actually pretty straightforward. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim off some of this wire. I don't really need them this long. Just get rid of some of the cable off the pickup as well. And I'm going to also get a little bit of heat shrink onto these. In fact, I think I'll use a slightly bigger bit than that. And before I go anywhere near the finish with a soldering iron, I'm just going to slip this little bit of leather over, and hopefully we can catch any drops of solder that might come along. So I'll just pre-tin all of these wires, and I'll also solder them together in the pairs that we need while we're doing this. And then we'll just very quickly drop a bit of solder onto those. And then just solder those two together. Bang on another bit of heat shrink just in case. And solder them up. And that should be the wiring up done. But before I do anything with that heat shrink, I'm just going to quickly plug this into the shop amp and make sure that everything works properly. And this is dead straightforward. It's all plugged in, and if I just tap on the pole piece, volume works, tone works. Spot on. So that is all the electrics working now. The trick now is to get all of this covered over so we're not going to get any shorts, and then pull it into the body in such a way that we can't see it, but also it's not interfering with anything else, which can sometimes be a little bit tricky. So I've got this little bit of cord here, which I will use to pull it into a position I want. But first of all, like I say, we need to get these covered over so there's not going to be any shorts. Again, just test that before I pull it all in. Now looking at this, I think I need to pull it all this way a little bit. So I'm just going to tie this on. Kind of poke it all in, pull it where I want it to go, and then just use whatever I can get in there to kind of pull it all out of the way. And that's all tucked in really nicely out of the way. So we can kind of poke the rest of those wires in and get the output jack in position and get that screwed in. Which only really leaves one major component to go onto this now, and that's the neck. So I'll get that slipped in position and get everything turned over. And I'll just fire these screws in. Now, someone did mention about whether I was going to use any kind of anti-seize or anything on these bolts, and it's actually probably quite a good idea. I'm not totally sure what materials are used for the screws and the inserts, and there could be the possibility that they're kind of a little bit dissimilar. So if one's stainless and the other isn't, that could lead to issues down the line of kind of bit of galvanic corrosion occurring. Now a little bit of copper grease or something in there would stop that from happening, because it creates a barrier between the two. However, my great big tub of copper grease is buried in the shed of doom. And I'm not even going to consider going in there at this time of night. What I will do probably at some point when this comes back in a month or two for a bit of fettling up, I'll take the neck off and make sure that there's something on there to stop it from seizing. But there, for the first time in reality, we have the two parts of the base together and looking somewhat instrument-like. However, we do still have quite a bit of work to do on this before it's going to be ready for playing. Obviously, it's going to need stringing up and setting up, but as well as putting the tuners on, we also need to make a nut, which is actually quite a lot of work. So there is no way I'm going to get all of that done in this episode. So I'm going to leave this one here, and we'll be back in a few days' time for the final episode in this series, where we'll get the rest of the components put on, get a nut made, get it strung up, and see what this beast sounds like. And I'm thinking, if it sounds anywhere near as good as it looks, it'll be an absolute belter. But obviously that's all going to be for the next episode. I'll leave this one here. As always, don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.